to change these laws is governed by long and cumbersome procedures, which were spelled out in Article 7 of the Gaza-Jericho Agreement. While these laws, especially the Israeli military orders, grant wide power to the security apparatus in these areas, the Palestinian authorities still invoke the PLO revolutionary criminal procedures. The reasons for this might be that the Palestinian authorities wish to grant wider power to the Palestinian police and other security forces, while embarrassed to use the laws of occupation. In addition to being harsh, these laws are not part of the laws of the land. Furthermore, very few Palestinians, if any, including those who invoke them, have copies of these laws. Clarifying such confusion does not seem to be a priority for the Palestinian Authority. Answering the question last summer on the adoption of the basic laws which commit the Palestinian authorities to human rights, the Minister of Justice said that their priority is to work on investment. Let's talk about some courts, the question of the courts and appointing judges and prosecutors. Without clarifying the legal rules on how and on who has the authority to appoint, dismiss, and promote judges, several controversial judicial appointments were made in Gaza and Jericho. A jurisdiction was also added in Jericho. The former Gaza lawyer who returned from forced exile after the implementation of the Gaza-Jericho Agreement was appointed by Mr. Arafat as the Chief Justice of Gaza. One of his first actions was an attempt to dismiss women judges in Gaza. Upon an intervention by Mr. Arafat, and of course he appointed him and he doesn't know what to do, he retreated. Mr. Arafat also appointed an Attorney General who does not possess a high reputation amongst the legal community in Gaza. During the occupation, Jericho had a magistrate court. Under the Palestinian rule, a district court has been established. A legally trained Palestinian from outside the occupied territories was appointed as its head. Contrary to accepted judicial practice, the appointment was made by the Minister of Municipal Affairs. Never heard of that. The Minister of Municipal Affairs appoint judges. The judge does not possess adequate knowledge of the existing laws in the area. His decisions are commonly based on personal views rather than the letter of the law. As a result, he has already committed a number of legal errors. Questions of the State Security Court. A number of arrests have been made in the West Bank and Gaza, roundups after operations claimed by Hamas or the Islamic Jihad against Israel. As a result, and heeding to pressure from various sources, Mr. Arafat decided to establish a State Security Court. Now, his argument is that the current judicial structures do not function properly or not fast enough, rapid enough to deal with such situations. Instead of strengthening the judiciary in the normal judiciary, the civil judiciary in the West Bank and Gaza, Mr. Arafat chose to create a parallel structure of the State Security Court. Now notice that he doesn't have a state, but we have a State Security Court. We have no state. To deal with the situation. Now, of course, the State Security Court and the establishment of the State Security Court, of course, created a lot of criticism in the occupied territories. It immediately echoed the badly reputed military force which are still in operation in the occupied territories and have been extremely harsh in dealing with Palestinian protesters and others. And therefore, many Palestinians cannot see how how Mr. Arafat can go that far of establishing the State Security Force when the setup, the legal setup in the West Bank and Gaza is not even clear. Now, treatment of prisoners, amongst the main problems facing the Palestinian prisoners is the inadequacy of the review procedure of their cases. Many times people are rounded up, detained without, they are commonly detained without legal basis. Suspects are not informed about the reasons for their detention. Many times the only reason that is given is that it's upon the order of the president, or like Mr. Surani was told, the president is angry at you, is arrested. Detainees remain in prison for a long period of time. In Jericho, release on bail is subject to the whim of the prosecutor, who also comes from the outside, and he has no adequate knowledge of the prevailing legal system, and therefore he does not follow the criminal procedures which are in place. While the majority of political prisoners report that they are generally well treated, those suspected of common crimes are beaten at random. In July last year, Mr. Farid Jarboua was the first Palestinian to die in Palestinian police custody. Now, right now I am not with Al-Haq, as was mentioned. Right now I am with the International Commission of Jurists, which is an organization based in Geneva. Last year, before all this has happened, we had a mission. We conducted a mission to the occupied territories. The International Commission of Jurists, which is an organization of lawyers founded since 1952, and the mission included a number of highly distinguished jurists from a number of countries. The mission looked at the setup that we are talking about right now, and before even the Gaza-Jericho agreement was implemented, made certain concrete recommendations to make sure that the Palestinian authorities, or recommended to the Palestinian authorities certain measures to make sure that human rights principles are respected. The first issue, of course, is clear. The first recommendation is clear: is incorporation of international human rights norms within the new legal system in the West Bank and Gaza. That the widest possible consultation of all sectors of society be exercised at every stage when drafting various laws and legal instruments. The Palestinians speak about how they are not consulted. The strict separation of power between the executive, legislative, and the judicial powers. That there be an independent judiciary and the independence of judiciary be guaranteed. That there be power to review executive actions by the judiciary. That the Palestinian police force be required to follow the code of conduct of law enforcement officials, the UN Code of Conduct, and respect human rights norms. That the independence of Palestinian human rights NGOs be respected, and that they will be allowed to function without interference of the authorities. We still hope that the Palestinian authorities can take some of these recommendations into account, and we sincerely believe that if these measures were taken into account, a lot of the Palestinian, I would say, problems in the areas of and violations in the areas of human rights could stop. Thank you very much.
Our next speaker is Dr. Ali Jarbawi, who is Associate Professor of Political Science at Birzeit University, specializing in comparative politics, the Middle East, and the Palestine question for his sins, which must have been many. Dr. Jarbawi is the author of the book The Intifada and Political Leadership in the West Bank and Gaza. He has 2 master's degrees and a PhD in political science from the University of Cincinnati. He's written numerous articles, and I really recommend his the insight and knowledge of his political analysis to all of you.
Thank you, Helena. I'm very pleased to be here. Can you hear me? Okay. After I heard Mayor Showa seems to me that it's not early to pass judgment. And it is also very sad for me as a Palestinian to say that if one is objective, he or she has to have a very dim assessment of the PNA. The dilemma with the Palestinian National Authority is not limited to attempts by its opponents to obstruct its course and development, but has been the result of its flawed birth. The internal and external conditions accompanying its birth were harsh and complicated, and the result was a fragile newborn lacking proper nurturing in its endless fight for survival. Apart from the internal Palestinian quarrel over the Oslo Agreement itself, the general Palestinian situation at the time the authority came into existence, especially in the West Bank and Gaza, was suffering from the kind of progressive deterioration and bewilderment that usually accompanies a raucous revolution whose expected results were not achieved. The years of the Intifada consumed most public Palestinian effort and sapped the people's energy to sacrifice in their struggle to end the occupation and achieve independence. This situation was not the best environment for the birth of the PNA. The expected internal support of the community to the authority was nowhere to be found because the community was lingering. Instead of perceiving itself as duty-bound to support the authority, giving it everything it needed for its growth and development, the community expected the authority to take care of it. And so the Palestinian Authority was born with the burden of delivering the society from the legacy of decades of Israeli occupation and from the negative situation it was passing through. It was assailed from its first day by countless demands without possessing the ability to fulfill even the minimal ones among them. The external conditions surrounding the birth of the authority were not much better than internal ones. In the Palestinian-Israeli scene, the balance of power had heavily tilted toward Israel. The secret Palestinian-Israeli agreement which emerged from Oslo was a reflection of the imbalance of power and demonstrated the absence of a regional and international system of checks and balances which might nurture the projected Palestinian Authority. Lacking support from within and lacking an external protection mechanism, the credibility of the newborn Palestinian Authority immediately came into question. To get over its problem, it had to prove its ability to achieve everything demanded of it in the least possible time. But expectations and commitments came from different sources, were often contradictory, and were impossible to find fulfillment all at once. So the authority fell into a contradictory and fell into a dilemma that grew with time, eroding the little credibility it had to start with. The dilemma of the PNA became an integral part of its development, increasing even as the authority itself grows. There are two aspects of this increasing dilemma. One is an external factor, one which the Palestinian side could not control during the Washington negotiations and therefore lost all ability to control thereafter. In fact, the external factors became the ones defining and controlling the Palestinian side's work. The other is an internal factor, one which the authority could have taken control over but never gave enough attention to. The internal factors became an open wound, weakening the Palestinian side ability to achieve a good start. As expected, the effects of both sources increase and accumulate as a result of the interaction between them. Each one affects and is affected by the other, and the result is that they both pressure the authority, which increasingly loses in credibility and effectiveness. Two factors comprise the external sources of the PNA's dilemma. First is the Israeli factor, centering on the Israeli vision of future relations with the Palestinians and the way the Israeli government deals with the Palestinian Authority in the era of peace. The Israeli objective ever since the Oslo Agreement has focused on taking advantage of the Palestinian weakness to liquidate the Palestinian issue according to the Israeli agenda and to open the door for an Israeli-Arab normalization of relations. Besides these two goals, the Israelis don't have a national consensus, except on the issue of Jerusalem, regarding the acceptable agenda for peace in the region. The current domestic conflict continues on how to interpret land for peace formula in Israel. Some want Israel to swallow the land in return for giving the Palestinians and Arabs peace. Others want to retain part of the land in return for peace with the Palestinians and Arabs. Because of the absence of an Israeli national consensus on the requirements of peace, because the Oslo Accords gave Israel what it wants, and because Rabin thinks like a general according to narrow political calculations, the Israeli government has worked to obstruct the agreement ever since it signed it. It hesitates to implement its basic points, in addition to having emptied the post-signing negotiations of their content. This government continues to allow the Israeli facts on the ground policy to continue in the occupied territories. With the agreement came more sieges on the Palestinians, more economic deterioration for them, more land confiscation, Judaization of Jerusalem, and settlement activity. And the Israelis succeeded more than ever in depriving the Palestinians of any political power. In the agreement, the Palestinians lost with the agreement all power to determine their fate, and this power was transferred to Israel. After the momentary highs of the signature of the Oslo Agreement on the White House lawn and Yasser Arafat's entry into Gaza, the Palestinians discovered that the agreement had not improved their situation in relation to the occupation. The whole world had accepted the announcement that peace had been achieved, and the region entered the era of normalization, while the Palestinians found themselves moving further from their goals of freedom and independence. A state of general depression set in among Palestinians as a result of Israeli measures and subsequent deterioration of Palestinian conditions. Soon the PNA's positions came to be seen in a negative light. This authority was the result of the Palestinian leadership's having permitted itself to be rushed into signing an agreement which was seen as having been made to save it at the expense of national rights. The authority also became a hostage of the agreement, which was justified to its people as an historic accomplishment, while in fact transforming the national cause into a matter of limited autonomy in Israeli-controlled enclaves. With bitterness, the Palestinians watched the authority acquiesce one concession after another in the face of continuous and growing Israeli pressures. The imbalance in the relationship between the Palestinian Authority and Israeli government in favor of the latter led to greater Palestinian disaffection toward this authority. This imbalance was taken to indicate that it cannot hang on that this authority cannot hang on to minimal Palestinian national rights. The Palestinians see in this authority a dilemma, because it can neither achieve progress in the peace process nor confess that it failed and decide to stop the decline. Naturally, this negative Palestinian perception of the position and role of the Palestinian Authority in its relationship with Israel had a great impact in limiting the authority's ability to impose its command in the Palestinian scene. The attempts to impose control have either been seen by the Palestinians as attempts to appease Israel or as compensation for the inability to close the gap in this unequal relationship. Either way, the Palestinians have assumed a skeptical outlook toward the PNA's intentions and attempts to impose its authority in the Palestinian street. This obviously doesn't help the authority to achieve the support and backing necessary for liftoff, especially since it is impotent to change its relationship with the Israeli side. The other external aspect of the predicament of the PNA is the lack of external political and economic support. When the Palestinian leadership grasped out for the Oslo Accords, it was hanging on to flourishing external hopes and promises of at least financial support, especially from the West. The leadership thought that international financial aid would drain upon it in the billions to make the peace process work. Its expectations were based on promises bereft of guarantees. It raised Palestinian expectations for the agreement in an attempt to achieve the greatest amount possible of immediate support. The peace agreement, it announced, was going to result in a qualitative leap in the economy of the West Bank and Gaza Strip, turning them into the Middle East Singapore. Along with continuous singing to the tune of freedom, independence, and Palestinian state with Jerusalem as its capital, the Palestinian street teemed with broad hopes and expectations accumulated. With the failure of the West to honor its supposed commitments, it had become apparent that the promises were aimed at reaching an agreement, not to create a Palestinian economic breakthrough. After the signing of the agreement, the international community adopted the drip-by-drip policy in sending financial aid to the PNA, i.e., delivering enough money to keep it alive, but not enough to create the promised and expected advancement. This tactic on the part of the international community resulted in a collective disillusionment in the occupied territories, one that gradually continues to grow. The economic situation, like the political one, did not improve after the agreement. For many, things were better before the agreement and the creation of the PNA. As expected, blame for deterioration of economic conditions was placed squarely upon the shoulders of the Palestinian leadership, which was charged with miscalculation, rushing to reach an agreement, and acceptance of promises without tangible guarantees. Any regime that cannot fulfill its political promises, one that lacks the financial resources needed to change the deteriorated economic situation of its people, cannot be expected to be effective, efficient, and able to attract its people's support for its attempts to impose its own authority. Internally, the source of the predicament of the PNA also comprises two main factors. The first is political, dealing with the division of Palestinian opinion regarding the Oslo Agreement, pursuant agreements and negotiations on details. The secret way the Oslo Accords were reached and imposed on the people by the Palestinian leadership through steps of questionable legality and legitimacy led to a very serious division. The Palestinian political arena split into two rigid poles after Oslo. One supports the agreement and the other opposes it. The political flexibility that Palestinian political activity had enjoyed for so long was lost with the Oslo Agreement. When the leadership reached the autonomous areas in the Gaza Strip and established the national authority, there was a brief opportunity for bypassing the polarization and reaching understanding on the best way to close the gap between those in authority and those in opposition. The Palestinian leadership should have taken a serious initiative to reach a minimum common ground of national action, because this is